computer. So we went ahead and we looked at reacttraining.com, which happens to have a React router inside there. And we looked at some basic examples, basically. We looked at the React router, and we went and click on web. And so we clicked on the basic example up here, and we realized that this is how we import browser router into our application, or this is at least how they want us to do it. So I am going to bring that into my application. Import browser router as router. I like that. I probably won't need route and link right now. I know this because I'm not going to implement any routes yet, right? So I'm going to delete them from there. And now the next step is to go back and look at the documentation again and see how they wrap everything. So looks like they're wrapping their whole rendered information inside a router. Okay. And I know for a fact that this is the only thing I am rendering, the only element I am rendering at this point. So I'm going to wrap it inside a router. And it's not too complicated. This is one way to do it. I like to make it pretty. So to remember that this is one of the arguments, the first argument of render. And then this would be the second argument of render. So I separate them and I put them in parentheses. Then I go like this and I type enter. I type enter again, so I know that this is top, this is first argument, this is second argument. So whatever's inside my parentheses, right, it should stay inside my parentheses. Cool. It's a little prettier to look at, and you can see the nested hierarchy in there. So I have my browser router added. Now I'm going to check my application to see if I broke something. Did something break? Nope, it didn't break. We're still good, right? And we've just wrapped our app in router, so later on we can use it. I need to do one more thing at this point, and that is to use Redux and wrap my application in a provider. Now this requires some boilerplate, right? Redux is going to need a couple of things. So would anybody care to guess how I implement Redux in here? And if you don't know, that's perfectly fine. I'll walk us through that process. So we've decided that in order to use Redux in our application, we were going to need to import our provider from React Redux. We were going to need to import create store, which allows us to create store from Redux. We were going to need to have a reducer, which we can later on extract into its own file. But for now, we're just going to have it in here. Just going to call it lowercase reducer. And this reducer is nothing more than a function. It is a function that takes, the first argument is the state of our current Redux state, right? So it's a copy of that, or reference to that. And then an action, and it would return some sort of state or modified state. At this point, the very basic part of the reducer is just to return the same state that it's given. So this will work as a dummy reducer, and we're going to call it just that, dummy reducer. Later on, we're going to have to need a real reducer in here imported. But this will work for our boilerplate, just so that we have Redux in our application. And later on, we can refactor to work with more in-depth Redux functionality. And now we have to create our store. So store equals create store. Create store requires the reducer, so we're going to pass it a dummy reducer. All right. And it's a very basic store. And we have to wrap our application in provider. So would anybody care to wonder how we do this? How do we wrap our application with provider? I'll give you a hint. We've done it with router, right? Okay, so I'll take it. You guys haven't done this yet, so I'm going to go ahead and show you. Provider. Yeah. Provider. But our provider is going to take one prop. That prop is called store. Okay, so let's see if our application even renders. Okay, so we rendered the application and we essentially wrapped it in provider, router. So we have access to routing, we have access to Redux. This is a very good, granted a little hacky boilerplate for putting the basics inside of our application so that we can continue forward, right? So at this point, I have a win. I have a base that I can work on, a good foundation, so to speak, that I can move forward from, right? So I am going to commit, add, or add, commit, push, right? So I'm going to turn off my server. So now that we got the nasty stuff out of the way, I call this the nasty stuff because honestly, none of this has made any functionality for us whatsoever yet. This is just preparing for functionality, right? This is just required things. And in general, all of my applications have this information by default. So at this point, I go in here inside my, my Lambda notes, right? And I copy that folder and I put it somewhere else, right? And I'm going to call that, you know, boilerplate React Redux or Dux. And then what else do we have in there? Router. So I have a boilerplate for it. And I didn't need the node modules. I'll get rid of them later. Shouldn't have done that. But I have my boilerplate, right? So I can copy and paste that anytime I want and start from scratch, so to speak, right? I have an empty application that I can add onto it, and I don't have to spend the time doing this every single time, right? So it would probably be a good idea to save that somewhere, maybe even make a repo of it, you know, boilerplate for React, Redux, and Router. And all you have to do is just git clone and yarn install, and you're at the first point, basically, step number one, right? So I have my little boilerplate here. I think it's almost done copying. I'll remove the node modules because I don't need them. But yeah, once it's done copying. So going back to my walkthrough for Lambda nodes, right? We have to think now about our battle plan. So at this point, I either take a break or go look at my battle plan. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at the battle plan inside. What is it? Slides? Where did I put it? It's one of my slides somewhere here. So let's go find it. Here we go. So my battle plan had a list of components, huh? So I'm going to copy these into a README. That's what the README is for. So that I can keep track of some information. So I'm going to put readme.md, and in there I just put my battle plan. So I have my left nav, I have my main content, I have my notes list, I have my node view, I have my edit node, my create node, my delete node. And then everything in here is just going to have one of those little bullets. I don't know how to do multi-line select with this, so I'm just doing one by one. Cool. So I just have a README. It's pretty. I can preview it. It looks kind of nice. It's not very well organized. Ooh, something broken here. these all need a space. That's why. Okay, so I can tell what each one of them is going to do for me, right? So I'm going to divide those into components right now. If anybody's talking, please mute your mic. So left nav, main content, note list, note view, edit node, create node. Would anybody guess to tell me how I would best organize my hierarchy of folders inside SRC to contain, right, all these components? How would I make this?
Make a folder called components.
There we go. So let's work on that. I do it inside SRC, right?
Yes.
All right. And then inside here, right, how do I organize every single one of these?
Put them in a file with their name.
Okay. That would be
.js,
yeah.
Like left nav.js.
Okay. And then main content and then
Right.
so on.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take it a step further. And I'm going to create a folder for each one of them. So I'm going to go and create a new folder called left nav. Right. And then I'm going to create another folder called main content. No, not there. There. And then from here, I'm going to create another folder called notes list. And from here, another folder called note view. And another folder called edit node. And another folder called create node. And yet another, folder called delete node, I think it was. Where did my file go? There we go. Was it delete node? Yeah, it was delete node. So okay, so I have a folder for each one of my components, right? And now I'm going to create the boilerplate for one of those components and copy it onto all the other ones. So in essence, inside each one of my components, I'm going to have their own styles, everything inside them, so that they are 100% pure. They do not need anybody else to work except those components that will be rendering nested inside of them, other components. So for example, my left nav, it's very pure. It's going to be by itself. It's not going to have anything inside of it specific. So I'm going to start with it, all right? I'm going to work on left nav. So I'm going to put a file in there. I'm going to call it left nav.js. And I'm going to create a file in there called left nav.css. So now the CSS for this will go in here, all right? And I can move that folder into any other project that I wish, and it will work. All I have to do is import left nav, and left nav will have its styles. It will have its functionality because it's all encapsulated inside a component. And call me lazy, but that's the way I work. If I made something before, I'll reuse it as much as I can. And you can probably guess that I have a left nav already made, which I do. I have navs already made. So this is just redoing it, but it's a good practice to show you how I sort of think about components and why I separate them so much. Because it could be just as easily to put them inside app.js, but this is the reason why. So I would create my boilerplate in here for my left nav. I need to uninstall an add-on first that I was testing, so give me one quick second. Here's this one. Uninstall, that one doesn't work. All right, there we go. Back to square one. Sorry about that, a little interruption, but there we go. So I have an extension that allows me to create the boilerplate for a React class component just by typing RCC, pressing tab, it takes the name of the file and it automatically makes it for me. Okay? This is very, very nice. So I don't really have to do much in here. And if I wanted a React Redux component, it would do it for me as well. It would even create my map state to props for me. And all what I have to do is just put state. This is useful. I'm going to start with very basic components. But this extension is called React Code Snippets. And I've been using it for a while. It's very, very simple and works very well. So if you guys like it, just go ahead and use it. Otherwise, you'll have to make this for every single file, right? And inside, in the middle of my left nav, I'm just going to put left nav placeholder, right? And in the top, I import the CSS. So I am going to import left nav CSS. Anybody care to tell me how I import CSS inside a React component? If I want to use CSS, a CSS file specifically in here, how would I import it in? Summer. Okay, that's for styled components, not necessarily. Oh, you're into something. Yep. Import the name of the file, .css. Now, in this case, we want to import leftnav.css, but yep, you were on the right spot. And, oh, Ikra, that was good, yeah. You actually took the file name, and you didn't have to do that. But, yeah, so I would type the name of the file, .css, and that works very well. Now, this line right here, I don't know, left nav.css. I'm just going to call it index.css so that I can have it for every file work the same way. Later on, React is going to compile all your CSS into one big, great CSS file. But this way, we let it know to, hey, by the way, React, use some of this CSS in that big, great CSS file when you do make it. Okay? So that's what we're doing in here. So I have left nav placeholder. I don't know why it doesn't like the word placeholder. Oh, pulse folder. There we go. All right. And so I'm going to do the same for every other component. I'm basically going to have an empty index of CSS inside. I just copy pasted my index of CSS. So that every one of them, if I decide that I want to use custom CSS for each one of them, I can. And I may not do it, right? And in every one of them, I'm going to make a new file. So create node is going to have create node.js. And in here, RCC tab. Done. And now I am going to use that little line that I had down there. Copy paste it. So I go to delete node and make a new one called delete node.js. Same thing for edit node. Edit node.js. You guys are getting really bored about this probably by now, but it's necessary evil. Main content. Main contents in there. What is it? Notes. Notes list. And note view is the last one. Okay, so I've essentially made boilerplate for each one of my components. And now I'm going to go through every one of them and just kind of put a placeholder. So so that I know when I import it and render it, right? It's gonna show me something. Left nav's already done. Main content. Okay, so we've got everything showing something, right? Now in our application, we're not still rendering anything. And let's prove that. Let me just navigate to that. To that folder in Yarn Start, right? Even though we've made all these components, and that is very pretty, we're still not showing any of them in our application. And that is because we haven't properly imported them and plugged them in. So now that I've had time to create every single one of my components boilerplate, I am going to plug them in. And after I plug them in, I am going to make a commit, because that would be a win, right? So every win, I make a commit. So I'm going to go inside my app.js, close every single other tab that I have in here that I don't need. Gosh, there's a lot of them. Awesome. So I have my app.js, and in here I'm going to import a few of the components. Now, I have to go back to that little battle plan that I made. So that's why I left it up here. In my battle plan, I had made my initial view containing only two sections, right? The left nav and the main content. And then left nav will always be visible. And main content, right, would contain inside, depending on the route, node list, edit node, create node, etc. So the only two elements that I will import inside my application are these two, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Inside my application, I'm going to import left nav from, I don't know, where's this at? Can anybody guess to tell me where I have to go in here? Where am I getting them? Let's see. I have a components folder, and then inside there I have a left nav folder, and then in there I have a left nav file. So let's see from what. You guys drive me, come on. You guys know how to do this, right? So how do I go from app to component to the left nav folder to the left nav file?
You would go dot dash component, that left nav, yeah, dash left nav, and then to the left nav.js. So dash left nav.js. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. This is exactly it. This is the way we do it. Now we can omit that JS, but it doesn't hurt to have it in there, right? And the way we know that this worked, our app's still rendering, right? Otherwise, it'll give us an error, right? If for some reason we messed up this part, let's say here, when we look at our app, it'll tell us, failed to compile, module not found. This usually talks about imports, right? And it says component / left nav. Ooh, wait a second. Is that where it's actually at? And then we go look at it and find out if it is. And it is not. We have to type left nav again. And now we're there. So just to prove to you that you don't need the JS, just in case you guys were wondering, you don't, right? It still renders. But it's nice to have it, you know, if you want to remind yourself. So we have left nav. So let's do the same thing for main content, right? Now it's slightly in the same spot. So we have both left nav and main content, right? And then this placeholder for the app is going to stay in the top because I like to leave that there. Now, how do I tell my application to render the component left nav and main content? What do I type down here? Oh, you guys onto something, man. That's awesome. So you even had the self-closing. Oh, come on. That's not fair. You guys are smarter than me. You don't even know how many times I kept forgetting the self-closing tag in the end. Like, that's cool. Like, you guys are doing great. And main content. Yep. Okay, cool. So I have one on top, one on the bottom, right? Guess what? That's exactly how it's going to show. One on top, one on the bottom, right? So before I even get any further, right, I'm happy, right? But this doesn't look the way I want it. So we're going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to commit, push. I have a win, right? You know, so I'm going to do that. Components boilerplate, created, imported, left, or let's make that a new line. And main content into app, rendered both, but styling is wrong. To do, work on styling. To display, side to side. So what am I doing here? I'm doing a multi-line commit, and I'm saying components boilerplate created, imported, left nav, and main contents into app, rendered both, but styling is wrong. I realize that. To do, work on styling to display side to side, right? Why did I put that comment in there? Well, let's get push. Now, let's say that I was interrupted. My boss says, look, Moses, you have to stop. You're going to have to work on these other projects for me. This client is going crazy, and we have to fix this bug. And so I go do that. And when I come back, I want to make sure that I go back exactly to where I left off from, right? And how do I know where I left off from if I don't leave myself a trail of breadcrumbs? So inside my GitHub, when I go back to that project, right, I can see my commit message, right? Components boilerplates created, right? Imported, left nav, and main content into app, rendered both, but styling is wrong. To do, right? So I'm like, I got it. I know where I left off. I know what I have to do now. So I left myself a little note, breadcrumb saying where the next step lies. And we're going to do that right now. Let's say that we came back from that other bug and we're like, okay, we got to make some styling happen in here. Now, all of my styling, because of Zen reasons, I use with Flexbox, okay? The reason why is Flexbox will be needed to know with React Native. And since I was going to use it in multiple places, in mobile and in regular browser environments, I decided that I might as well learn. So the trick about Flexbox is that the change that you want to happen, you don't apply it to the component. So I now want left nav to be left and main content to be right. And my first approach would be to apply the styling to left nav. No, you have to apply it to the parent, okay? So I want them to go left to right instead of top to bottom. So I have to go on a parent, which is this div right here. This is the parent of both of them, and also of this placeholder that I no longer need. So I'm going to delete that placeholder. And to the parent, I'm going to apply some CSS. And there's a couple of different ways to do these, but what is the most basic way? Can you guys tell me? There you go, class name. Oh, that's awesome. So class name equals, and then, of course, in here we name whatever the class is going to be. Now, the reason we don't use class like we do inside HTML is because in JavaScript, class is what we use to define our components as class components, you see? So this is a reserved keyword. And while it might work, it's not a good way. It's not a good way to do it. So React provided for us class name to kind of differentiate between class and HTML, CSS class. So Now we know why we use class name, and we're going to give it a class name. Normally, I would think about the high level that I'm on right now, right? And I would call these app container, because that's what this thing is doing. It's containing my whole app. This is holding my whole application, right? So my app container is a class name. Now, where do I have CSS at this level? Let's see, I have index of CSS, right? And I'll teach you a trick. Everything that you put in here, you can use in any of the other components that are nested inside it. Because app is inside your index file and index of CSS is imported here, anything that's held inside app has access to those styles. So let's see if that's true, right? We're gonna do a test here. We have our app and we have a class name of app container. We're gonna add it to our index of CSS, which is not imported here, if you notice. We don't have any CSS imports up here. We're gonna put it in there. And let's see. Oh, I see some ugly things already happening here. Margin 0, margin 0 out. I like everything to be centered out. Font family, that's fine. We'll figure about the font later. Let's make some basic rules. Box sizing. Sizing's at the bottom. There we go. Over the box. This is how I am happy about the results. I want to make sure that I don't exceed the size of my box when I add padding. This is how I make sure. And then in here, I'm gonna create the class for app container. All right. So the first thing, since I talked about using flex, I want this to be a flex box, right? So let's see what happens when I do that. I have my current application rendering like this, right? There. Oh, I need to turn the server back on. Sorry, guys. Give it a second. It's going to open a new tab. There we go. Five years later. Okay, so my left nav placeholder and my main content placeholder on top of each other, right? I'm actually going to put it on the left here so that I can see them better. Resize my windows around them so I don't have to keep tabbing back and forth, right? There we go. So I have my left nav placeholder and my main content placeholder. I want them side to side. So look what happens when I go to index the CSS and I add something here called display flex. Let's see what happens. Oh, dang. Left nav placeholder, main content placeholder. So it turns out that now they're next to each other. Okay? And I don't have any styling on them. That's why there's no space in between it, right? But they are next to each other. So I've sort of achieved what I wanted in a way. I may want some more separation in between them to kind of like make sure that what I'm doing is correct. So let's go into main content and CSS, add a class name to this. Guess what this is going to be? If the other one was an app container, what do you think this one's going to have? You guessed it. Or just call it main container. We'll know what it means. And yes, so main container, let's go inside here. We have our main container, and I don't know. We're going to display flex in here as well, because everything for me is flex. And we're going to add some padding. That's good enough for me now. So now we're separating it, and this same thing, I'm going to put it in my nav. It's going to be nav container. Cool. So now they're separated. I have one on the left and one on the right. I have more or less what I was looking for. Still not what I want. I mean, it's a far shot from what I need. But I have a very good place to move forward from. Inside my index is CSS. When I go debugging, I normally do this border, 1 pixel solid red. This will put a border on everything in my window in my page, so that I can see the edges of everything, right? So I can see I have a div that holds everything and another div that holds everything, and then I have 2 divs, one on the left and one on the right. Okay, and this is pretty cool. So whenever you are not sure about your debugging of CSS, I would have that line just commented out when you don't need it, and then uncommented when you need it. This is not necessarily a good practice, but it's good for developers to test their code. Okay. Now I want to ask you guys, do you understand why when we did display flex, the items went left to right as opposed to top to bottom? Like if we don't have display flex, let me just comment this line out. You're going to see that items go on top of each other, right? So does anybody know? Oh, somebody said row. Yeah, flex direction by default is row. Yep. So there's a property called flex direction inside every flex component, and you have a choice: column, column reverse, inherit, initial, row, row reverse, and onset, right? These are all properties, and you can mess with them. You can go column, and you can see that they're top to bottom, all right? If we go flex direction, let's see what happens when we go row. They're next to each other. And, you know, if we go row reverse, what do you think is going to happen? Puts them backwards, huh? Pretty cool. So there's a couple of different ones you can do. But by default, right, when you do display flex, flex direction is row. So we don't need to specify this, right? We can leave it there. It's nice to have to remind us which direction this flex is actually going. But by default is row. And by default, it will not wrap, right? This is what we want. There's another property called flex wrap. Now let me put those red boxes in there so you understand what I'm talking about. By default, flex wrap, which is another property, is set to no wrap, which means that no matter how small this gets, it will never put one below the other. However, if we put that property to wrap, now it will put them under each other. So at the point where the box is smaller than the component, bam, puts them below each other. This could be useful. We can use this for our notes later. We definitely want them to wrap, right? If there's a bunch of notes, we want them to go on the next line and so on. So we're going to use this later. But this displays what we don't want in our main application and what we might want in another component. So I'm going to say flex wrap, no wrap. You know, and now we're back to, oh yeah, it just squishes everything, which is how I want it, right? Or we just don't specify anything. And that will be the default behavior for flex, right? So we've learned about flex a little bit. Who is still flaky on flex? And what we've done so far. Okay, took the time a little bit for questions. Don't have questions, moving forward. So now the next step would be to properly size my components, right? I'm going to look at my images really quick, and I'm going to cheat. I have those images somewhere inside here in my proofs, and I need something like, looks like my left navigation bar always looks the same. I'm just switching through them, and I don't know how many pixels this is, right? So I can probably guess more or less, but I'm assuming that maybe it's like a third of this whole, maybe not a third, like a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's a quarter of the whole page. So I am going to right click this and go to properties and see that details say that this is a 913 by 973. So if we take 900 and we divide it by 4, what do we get? 225. So that is the width of our nav, more or less. About 230. Doing some math, right? Because I took this and I said, okay, let me actually annotate so you guys can understand my madness. I said, this is my nav, and this is roughly the same size as this, and this, and this. And so roughly I have, I don't know, let me go back to drawing. 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the whole. So that is 0.25 of the whole width. And if 900 is the whole width, then I get about 225 or so. What's it? So I'm going to round it out to 230 for my nav, or maybe even 220, because there's a little space in here and a little space in here. So 220 sounds good. So my nav is going to have 220. And this whole section, since it's 3 sections of 220, so 220 plus 220 plus 220, what's that? 660, I think, without doing the math. So this whole section is going to be 660. That's the maximum width of it, right? Now this one's going to have the same width all the time. This one over here is going to have a maximum width of 660. I know that this looks messy, but that's how I use my logic when somebody gives me an image and I'm like, oh, what sizes are they talking about? I look at the resolution of the image and work my way down. Okay? So I'm going to clear all that drawing. Stop annotating. Here we go. Cool. Oh. There you go. Minimize that. Minimize that. So let's see. Looking at our left navigation, our nav container, let's give it a width. And this is going to be the same width all the time. We said, was it like 220? 220 pixels. So our left nav is not going to be any smaller than that ever. Or we hope so. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So maybe we need to have a minimum width. There we go. A lot of CSS is like cooking. I like to tell that to everybody that I know. I put a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, dash of lemon. I tasted. Oh, yeah, that worked. So you need to have the back and forth feel of visual representation versus what you're actually doing to sometimes debug your decision making. And yeah, as LaBelle told me once, it'll be a lot like this. Let me just show you guys. I'm going to share with you guys a picture real quick. You're probably going to laugh, LaBelle, but yeah, this is it's in screenshots somewhere. I took a screenshot of it because he shared it. Oh, it's not here. Oh, I forgot where I saved it. You can share that picture. He showed me a picture of what he thinks CSS is like, and I thought it was totally hilarious. Maybe he can share with you guys later. But yeah, so we have to try something. Like you can see how width, I tried width there, and I didn't like the way it looked. It was still being modified by the flex nut wrapping. And so I decided to give it a minimum width so that it never goes below that size, no matter what, right? And I can still have my width so that it never goes above this, right? So I am setting both of them. It never goes below that, you know, that's my minimum width, right? And I can have, you know, my width at 220 pixels. There you go. That's what he thinks CSS is like. So something to think about. Now, another thing that I have to consider in here is the height of my navigation bar, right? So when we look at our pictures, it always takes up the whole window, right? The whole size of the window. It takes up that whole space, right? So we want our navigation bar to take up the whole space. And right now, our navigation bar only takes up a tiny little space, right? So how can we make sure that it always takes up that whole space? So we have to deal with a property called height, right? And we can work pixels here, you know. I mean, thinking about it, if our picture has a certain dimension, right, then we can look at the dimensions and see, okay, 968 pixels high, right? So we can say, yeah, the height should be 968 pixels. But this is not pretty, because what if I have a really tall screen like mine right now? It's 1200. Well, guess what? Now I have the bottom of the screen blank, and I really don't like that. I want it to go all the way to the infinity, right? So another way to try these is 100%, but 100% of what? So when we try 100%, it doesn't go all the way down. So I'm like, wait a second, 100% doesn't work, because 100% is concerned about whatever the elements are inside. So as big as the elements inside. So let's try something different. There is a property called view height and view width. 100 VH means as big as my window. Now it goes all the way to the bottom. See that there? And now I get a scroll bar because of those little borders are on the outside of the size. So that's pretty good. 100 VH takes me to a consistent, always as big as my window, right? So if we take away our little cute borders, which we don't need anymore because, well, we know what our thing looks like. And we go back to my left nav index as CSS. Let's give this a background color. Let's choose light gray for now. Now we have our navigation bar going all the way to the bottom. All right, great. I have something. And then the main content, well, we have to work on that as well. Let's see our main content. Main content container, main container. So let's give this similar styling that we did with our left nav, right? So I'm going to copy some of this stuff to my main content. And let's see here. Padding 1 RAM. The minimum width, well, this one we talked about, what was it, 660 pixels. The height should be 100 VH, and then the background color, well, we don't definitely want light gray. We probably want white in here. Now let's look at our little pictures. This background color is light gray. This background color is another gray. So how do I find out what those colors are, right? And you can say Photoshop. You know, you can probably say, you know, use I don't know, a program that gives you those colors. But the easiest way that I can think of, right, is to bring it into my browser, and then I have a little extension that lets me have an eyedropper. So I make a new tab, and then I bring these in. I just drop it on top of my browser, and I have my little eyedropper. And why is it not working? Dang it. Well, usually these works, dang. Maybe it doesn't want to load them from my, it doesn't have permission to do it from my computer, so I'm going to go to my GitHub. There's another trick for this. Front-end project walkthrough. You see where I put my proofs in here? There's a method to that madness, right? So let's go to list view, which is probably the prettiest of them all, right? Now I can do it. So I can put my eyedropper on top of this color, and then it tells me that it's D3, D3, D3. I like that. So now I know what that gray is all about. So let's go in our code and use D3, D3, D3 inside our nav bar. Instead of light gray, Cool. And then I want to do the same for this light gray one. F1, F1, F1. So that's our main content. Anybody not following me so far? Color picker on Mac. Yeah, that probably comes built in, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, us Windows users don't have all those bells and whistles. Yeah. Yeah, totally rocking. And I would use Paint, but Paint's for Windows only. That's not very fair. I know Chrome is for everybody. Everybody has Chrome. But yeah, totally liking this. Let's see. So we have our two colors. Do you think we need any other colors in here? Probably maybe this color right here. Maybe the color of our text, you know. Oh, this extension. It's called Color Pick Eyedropper. And the only reason I use it is because it lets me know in between very thin pixels the actual color. So like it enhances the width of the pixels. So I can tell what the outline of this view nodes is, which is RGB 134, 174, 177, as opposed to the inside color, which is a total RGB, different RGB color. So I can tell the little shadow that they used on that, what color it was. Very, very useful extension for specifically picking at something. And I would do the same for like Lambda. I can tell the very edge of the text has one color versus like the inside of the text is another color. Now, that's granted because of anti-aliasing or aliasing reasons, but you can be very specific about pixel color. So like the color of the gray looks like it might be 666666. That's the RGB color of the red. A bunch of 66s. Oh, that's scary. I would do a bunch of 65s. I'm superstitious. So, but yeah, you can pick each one of those individually. So in my main container, I'm going to go ahead and set the color. All right. So the color of the default text in here. Right. That's what color means. To RGB 66,66,66, right? That's what the client wants. So yeah, I don't even know what that color would look like. Probably brown or something. I don't know. Like really dark anyway. And now we have our default text inside our React app, right? This default text slightly different color than this one over here. It's a little bit different gray or something like that. And the other one, let's see if it's the same color, the one over here. Yeah, it looks like about the same color, so we don't have to modify it for both of them. We can actually set that as the default color for the whole application. So let's do it inside our index in the body. And then later on, each individual component, like the notes, I know that's a black. So note title is in black, but the note body is in that grayish. So, and then the buttons themselves, we can set the text to white. So yeah, now I just set it on the whole body right here. And everything that's in the body will have that default unless otherwise specified. Cool. So something about the font, though. I think somebody mentioned that the font for this project was Roboto. So VS Code provides you with a snippet every time you want to use a certain font. In case it's not available in the system, it tells you all the other fonts that look like it that will be available depending on the system. So I use that snippet. I type Roboto and then it gives me whatever it gives me. Usually works out. So if Roboto is available, use it. Otherwise, it will use another one of those other different fonts. But if you want something very specific, you might have to import it from Google, right? I like Helvetica, Sans Serif, and you know, all the other ones are decent fonts. Open Sans, yeah, those are all good. Roboto, not necessarily. So I'm just gonna use those. Cool. And you can use multiple fonts if some are not available and others, right? So we have our boilerplate for our application styled, right? We have the right content, the left content. We still don't have the application properly scaling. If you see here, I'd like left nav and main content to move in the center of my app as I am making the whole window bigger, so that you know, I don't have all this white space to the right. And so I am going to handle that inside here. My app container has a display of flex. I'm going to put a margin 0 auto on it. What does this do, right? I am saying the top and the bottom margin of my application will be 0, but the left and right margin will be automatic. So if this is done properly, why is this not actually working? Is there something else holding my app together? Yeah, there might be. So let's look at our app and find out why the expected result. So what I'm trying to say is, when I make it big, it doesn't automatically center in my view, and I like it to center in the view. So I'm going to look at the JS real quick and see, okay, my whole application is wrapped by one div called app container. But what's wrapping this app component? I go to index, and that's router, and that's provider. So nothing else style-wise is wrapping it. So I am going to right-click this and inspect. I'm going to look at how everything gets held together by app container, and has margin 0 auto and display flex. So when you're displaying flex, margin 0 auto no longer aligns your components. By the way, I made this mistake on purpose so that you can understand that one overrides the other. So how do we align items in a flex box, or put them centered, so to speak? Does anybody care to guess about how we achieve that? As opposed to margin 0 auto, which we know doesn't work.
Would you put flex center? No.
Well, that's a good guess, but no. Let's
justify content center.
There you go. There you go. So justify content center. Now, justify content is talking about the x-axis, whereas like align items talking about the y-axis. This gets flipped when we change our flex direction from row to column, okay? So something important to remember. So right now they're aligned at flex start, but when we align them at center, right, it puts them in the middle of our page. Now it does exactly what I expected it to do. Now I'm going to let go of the mouse so you guys can see the progress of it. But that is what I wanted. I wanted that when I resize my window, you know, the white space is evenly on the left and on the right. Cool. So we've got sort of basic, I don't know, box for our application where everything is boxed in. We're going to commit and say basic styles, you know, finish, or initial style finish. I'm going to leave my server running and open another command prompt from that folder real quick in the root of the folder. I want to teach you guys something, so let me just zoom in a little bit in this console. If you guys want to add and commit at the same time, you can use this command, git commit am. All right? That adds everything, and then it adds a message. And the message is going to see styling, boilerplate, you know, finish. And it's going to have multi-line. It's going to say left nav and main content. Styling. Replace. With basic background colors. And flex implement. Cool. So git commit AM allowed me to add all the files and put a message all in one command. So you don't have to git add period and then make another line for that. This little message right here. Very useful sometimes, sometimes not. So it might bite you later. But I use it whenever I can. So back to our project. Next step now. Probably take a break, but I'm not going to really take a break. I'm on the roll, right? So I want to perfectly style my left navigation so that it looks like my picture, which is one of these. In any of these, right? So I want it to look like that. So what I do is I kind of put a window there so I know what it looks like. And then I put another window on top of it. Ooh. There we go. And I want my app container to never resize below a certain point. I forgot that part. Remember we talked about that big width of the image, which was around 900 and something pixels. So we're going to need that information again. Properties, details. What was it? 913. So let's make it min width 920. I'm giving it a minimum width of 920 pixels. So for now, it will not get smaller than that, no matter what. Right? And 900 pixels is good enough. So it will never get smaller than 900 pixels so that I can work with it. So I'm going to leave my browser window in there and my picture over there. So I have both as a reference, right? And I'm going to start styling. So let's see, I have to put lambda notes instead of left nav placeholder. So I'm going to put here lambda notes as the text. And that's going to be inside, I believe I said an H2 or something. I don't remember. Let's see if an H2 is good enough. A little bit bigger, H1. Oh, yeah, I like that. That H1 is good. I'm noticing that the H1 has a lot of space or padding in the top right. So I'm going to give this a class name. Nav header. And I'm going to work inside my CSS with that nav header. So I'm going to give it padding, I don't know, 0, margin 0. Let's see if this fixes some of my problems. There we go. So by default, an H1 header has either padding or margin. Let's find out what it is. So it's margin what it has. It has a margin of something. And we just took that away because we don't want it to have a margin. We already have our little padding around our navigation bar. So we no longer need HTML to take care of that for us, right? And let's see what else we might want. Maybe, does that text have a shadow? No, it doesn't look like it has a shadow. We need 2 buttons, so let's go ahead and add those 2 buttons inside our, actually no. Let's think about structure for a second. Let's look at the structure plan inside here. So we talked about inside the left nav, we were going to have 2 divs, one for the header and one for the buttons. So let's go ahead and do that before we go about making the buttons. We're going to separate things into divs. We got to follow our plan. Sometimes when I'm lost, I keep looking at my plan, right? So let's see, resize it back. Inside here, I'm gonna wrap this in a div. Okay, and then I'm gonna put one below it for my buttons. Okay, so this is for the nav header, and this is for the nav buttons. And maybe give this a class. Nav buttons container. Sounds good. That's more like an ID, but yeah. So in here, I'm going to have, I don't know, a couple buttons. So what does this button say? View your notes and create your notes, right? Oh, create new note. Okay. So we have two buttons in our nav bar. Look at it. Very nice, but they're not ordered the way we want it. They're going from left to right. Anybody care to wonder why? It has to do with CSS, by the way.
And a display flex?
Correct. This flex inside our nav bar is going from left to right. Now we want things to go from top to bottom. So exactly, we're going to turn it into column. And the way we do that, we go flex direction, column. And now they're on top of each other. They're still not pretty, but at least they're ordered properly. Okay? So let's go back to our little buttons inside our nav bar, right? Now left nav say that we have nav buttons container. Okay? So let's make that as well. Nav buttons container. Let's see. It looks like they're separated from Lambda notes, right? So we're going to give it some margin. Whenever you want to separate things on the outside of each other, you give it margin. Whenever you want to create space inside, you'll use padding. So margin, and the margin seems to be about the space of one font size. So let's see if that's true. Okay, now we want the margin in the top to be 1 rem, but not the margin in the left and the right as well. So we go 0, 0, 0. What does this do? We say the top margin to be 1 rem, you know, and then the top right margin to be 0, bottom margin to be 0, and left margin to be 0. So this is equivalent to, let's just go like this. T, B, R, L. Treble. Top, bottom, right, left. So we know what we're talking about here in the margins, right? You can always go margin left, margin top, margin bottom, but this is the lazy way to do it. So margins are set more or less to the size of the picture, right? We're not trying to be pixel perfect, at least not yet. And we want to probably display flex, because I like flex, and flex direction column, because they need to be on top of each other. All right. Now,
Moises,
uh-huh.
I think the B and R need to swap places on line 15. It's top right, bottom left.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, you're right. Bottom left. There you go. Ah, awesome. So now we have flex direction column. Thanks for that little tip. I messed up. It's called dyslexia. So we changed it from, because by default Flex has a row, so they're left and right. So from left and right to top and bottom. So now they're on top of each other, and they're taking up as big as the container is, right? So this is desired. This is not a bad result, right? They become as big as the container minus the padding. Remember, we added some padding of 1 rem initially inside the whole container. So this is okay, but they're still not big enough. They're still not blue. Their text still not white, right? So at this point, I would decide whether or not I really want to use button, because a div can do the same as a button. It can look the same as a button. It can react the same as a button. Granted, it does not have the built-in functionality with Mac OS and Windows to look weird like this. Windows buttons look a lot uglier than Mac buttons. But so I can decide to style the button, or I can decide to style a div. Now, I like divs because I can do anything I want with it. So I'm going to style a div. So at this point, I've decided that my button is not going to be a button. It's going to be a div. So I select all my buttons and I say, you guys are divs. And, you know, now I have to make some real work happen, right? Because there's no border on them, there's no color on them, and there's no background on them. But my buttons didn't give me any nice styles anyway to begin with. So I'm going to go class name equals nav button. Right. Then I'm going to copy that class name and give it to the bottom one. Right. Yes, I can do this. This is totally allowed. And with CSS, we're going to make our nav button. So let's see. It looks like our buttons over here might be about 30 or 40 pixels high. So we're going to give them, well, first let's work with the background color. That's like teal. We're going to start with teal. We're going to work our way to getting the actual color later. Oh, teal's ugly. No, we're not going to work with teal. Let's find out the actual color first. So the actual color is this color, 23B8BE. Sorry about that distraction. I just couldn't work with teal. All right, so our background color is what we need. It looks like they have a slight little border of another color. So border, 1 pixel, solid, I don't know. Let's find out what that color is in a second. Back to GitHub. That's our color. So they have like a slight little gray border. It looks like they're separated from everything. So it looks like they're separated from top, bottom, left, and right for about the same distance, which we only need top and bottom because left and right is already done for us. So let's give them a margin of top and bottom, which is the, I'm going to have to explain this one too in a second. Hold on. So when you just want to do top and bottom and no left and like top and bottom and left and right, you can do 2 numbers in the margin only. So you can say, I'm going to provide 2 numbers. The first one is the top and bottom, which is going to be 1 rem, and the left and right is going to be 0. And so it'll take it for 2 numbers only if you want to. Now that's too much. 0.5 rem probably better. Yeah, that looks more like the size in between them. However, we're separating from the top and the bottom, right? So we already had our container separating for us. So we're not going to need that container to separate the buttons for us. They're going to do it themselves, right? That's something to think about. Or maybe our container only needs to separate them for 0.5 rem, which is much less than, you know, what we initially had it, right? So we have to compensate because now each button has a top and a bottom margin. So it's something to think about when you're styling. You may have to take away from something else once you start nesting things and properly separating the things that are nested. Then they have about a height of 30 pixels or something like that. So let's give them a height of 30 pixels. And let's see if that works. Height of 30 pixels too small. How about 60? Too big. 50. 50 is close. 45. Oh, that looks very close, actually. Provided that I'm not zooming or anything. Let's see. Slightly bigger, 50 definitely. Oh, no, 40, definitely. Slightly smaller. So they're about 40 pixels, right? Would you guys say so, or maybe? I know I'm not trying to make a pixel perfect thing. And they do have tiny rounded borders, if any. I'm not 100% if those are rounded or that's aliasing, but let's say that they have rounded borders. So would anybody care to think about how I make rounded borders first?
Border radius.
Oh, we're onto something. Border radius. And let's put 0.5 RAM and work our way up from there. So we have tiny rounded borders, right? Very tiny. You can barely see them, right? Or, you know, we can have something as like 1 RAM, which is like really big rounded borders, right? Which we definitely don't want because that's not what the client gave us. So 0.2 RAM, how's that look? 0.1. Okay, I'm going with 0.1 RAM. It's just very tiny rounded borders. If you zoom in, you can see them. But, you know, by default, you won't see them that well. But the boxes won't be perfectly sharp. So it looks more like the picture on the left. So now we still have to worry about our text. It being white, it being centered in the X and the Y axis. So we can make our button a flex because it is the parent of our text, right? So when we want to center something, we go to its parent. And to prove that to you, the text is inside the button, right? Since we can't add style to the text because I wouldn't do anything with flex, we add it to the parent. So I'm making it flex, and I'm going to center things inside the same way we did it with, what's it called, the whole container. So anybody care to think about how I do that in here? Centering something inside flex. Let's see if the J gives it up.
Justify content.
There you go. Now that's going to take care of one axis, left and right, which means x-axis, right? What's the other axis?
Align items.
Align items. There you go. All right, so now we have center up and down, center left and right. Oh, look at that. They're looking a lot closer to those buttons, right? We still need to make the text white, so that's straightforward color. So now our text is white. We might need to make this text bold. Does anybody know how to do that?
You can use font weight.
Oh, yeah. Now I'm going to show something cool with font weight. Now you can use different amounts of weight. So like 900 to me, it's like really, really bold, like thick bold, very fat bold kind of thing, extra bold, right? And like 600 smaller than that bold. So it's a little less bold. So I think 600 is very close to our view notes over there. Now we can go even smaller, like 300, which is in between regular and nothing, right? And 400, 500 and up, right? I don't think the browsers all interpret these numbers. So I think 600 and 900 are the two that each browser interprets. So it's something good to think about. It's not every browser is going to interpret those numbers scaling up all the way. Some fonts do provide that. Some fonts do not. So something to think about. I think Helvetica New and Arial provide it. They go from bold to black, but not every other font will do it. So you may have to treat it like salt and pepper and taste it just to make sure that you get the result that you want. And that's what we have here. We have our buttons and we have our navigation bar, and it looks pretty close. I'm confident that we can say that our navigation bar is styled. And what are we going to do right now? Since we made a win, we commit and we push. So I'm going to go over here and say git commit /am. I'm going to say styled navigation bar and buttons. Anybody not with me on what we've done so far? Would you like me to explain any of these concepts? Okay, that's good. So we can move forward to styling the right section, right? And to do that, I'm going to go look at my battle plan again, right? I always look at my battle plan. That's why I made them. So I look over here and I say, yeah, I got a big div that wraps everything. And then I have one div for my header and then one div for the components, right? So I think that main content should only be this big div, right? And then the inside part should be each individual component, like note lists, edit note, and create note. So I am going to do that, right? I'm going to set main content just to hold stuff inside, right? And nothing else. So main content has a padding, just like the nav bar has a padding. So that lets me know that my components are not going to need a padding on the wrapper, right? So let's go and bring in a component so that we can start styling. Oops, I minimized it. I should have sort of resized it, right? So that we can start styling things to look more like this. So I'm going to put this in the bottom right now. Somewhere down here. That's pretty good. And then I'm going to have my page resized up here on the top so that I can see, you know, what it's supposed to look like. And I want this area to look a lot like that, right? So I'm even going to ignore the nav bar because I know the nav bar looks good-ish for now. I'm going to focus on this other section. And I'm going to go to my main content. And in here, right, I'm going to bring in a component. Just for show, nothing specific. I'm going to import notes list. Would anybody care to tell me where I import notes list from? Or how I import notes list, which happens to be in the same components folder, right, but outside of the main contents folder. Okay, so I am in here, and I want to get to here. So what would I type up there?
Dot.
Okay.
Slash components.
No.
Or dot.
You do dot slash. Now we are inside the components folder. All right. So let's go one step at a time in here. Let's go draw it. All right. Dot slash gets us in here. So from here, where do we go? From here, we have to go to this folder.
We're going to go into the main content. .js.
No,
Or note list. Okay, we're going to note list.
Yeah, note list, exactly.
Okay.
So we're gonna type slash note list.
And then slash note list .js.
.js, perfect.
All right.
Now we can ignore the .js, but yeah, that's exactly how we do it. So we've effectively imported it, and how we know we did it? Because it renders, right? If there was an error here, we would see that error, and we're about to see it right now. So here we go. So you guys did a great job. So we have note list imported, right? Now I want to add it to my main content in here, right? so that it shows up in here inside main content. So how would I do that? What would be the way to put that in here? And I'm going to clear my drawings.
Use the tag note list with the backwards ending closing.
Okay, cool. So now our notes list is going to show in there, and there we go. See, we have our placeholder and our note list. Notice something in here. Our main content is displaying thing in a flex order, but we definitely want it to be, instead of left and right, top and bottom, right? So our main container needs to change from the default flex to what? So we can go top to bottom.
Flex direction column.
There we go. So now we show top and bottom stuff. That's the way I like things to be shown inside my main content. And so we go to main content, then we got the placeholder, and we got notes list. Now, I'm going to get rid of the placeholder. I don't need the placeholder, to be honest with you, right? I just want notes list to be shown in there, right? And I'm just testing for styling, right? I'm not really too worried about my content at this point. So I'm going to go inside notes list now that I know that I'm rendering this inside here, right? I'm going to go inside notes list and start modifying it, right? So instead of saying notes list placeholder, it's probably going to have a div that goes on top and has the header, and then another div that has the notes, right? And this is going to have a class, which by the pattern that we have so far should probably be notes list or notes container. That sounds pretty good. Or notes list container, to be more specific. And because I like flex, guess what? We display flex all the time, but now it breaks it because it's left and right, and we want things to be top and bottom. So flex direction column. So we have our notes list, and we have our header and our notes, right? And our header, it's going to have inside, what is it, an H2, did we say initially? Let's look at our H2. I can very small read that. Yeah, it's an H2. Let's see if an H2 works. Ignore that one. So we have an H2 in here. Closing H2. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, I like that. I like that very much. It's almost as big as that other one, but not quite as big, is it? Let's see. And it needs to be more like an H3. Oops. So let's make it an H3. Yeah, that's better. And this is going to say your notes. Okay. And then underneath it, we're going to have a bunch of notes. So let's hard code some notes in here for one. I'm just going to hard code them. I'm going for styling, so later on I'll actually make this functional, but in here, you know, we're just going to have a div that says this would be a note or note title. It's going to be an H4, maybe. So now I have some very basic note, right? nothing in it, you know, very, very complex, but, and then a paragraph with lorem ipsum. So let's get some I've got something here. Oh, I don't want 250. I want like 50 characters. That's good enough. 50 words. Well, that's too big. Man, 5 words. Well, I think they're just making paragraphs. Okay, fine. I'll take what I can. So we have a note, right? Oh, our note is very big, right? Oh, let me close the door. I got the kids coming in, so they're going to be noisy. So I have one note, and let's copy these into another note and another note and so on. This is what I copied. So, note for now. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes. So I've got 6 notes. They're not displaying the way I want them, right? And they're going overboard and all that stuff. So let's see how we handle this situation where we have your notes and then we have the notes underneath, right? So we need to style each individual note to have a div that has more or less, how many pixels? Oh, this is called rainbow indents. Yeah, I totally love it because, well, number one, it's a rainbow, and number two, it's very easy to know where each section lies down. So I know that this div starts here and ends here by the color. This one starts here and ends here by the color, and so on. It's called rainbow indents. I've used it since the very beginning of Lambda. I think Ryan had it maybe, or someone else that, you know, might have been a professor you guys never got to see. So yeah, I love it. It's good. It works really well for me. Instead of having to follow lines, they follow colors. I'm visual. You can probably guess that already. So I have my little div here called note, right? And I'm gonna have to create some sort of style for each individual note. So I'm gonna go inside my index of CSS, and in my note, I'm gonna give it a width, or a width of. Let's see, if our nav bar is, what was it, 200 and, what was our nav bar width? I forgot about it. This is why I need to write things down. Start getting old after 220 pixels. And it is smaller than that, but not too much smaller. So it might be like 200 pixels wide by about 250 high. So more or less is 2 by 250. So let's go inside my notes CSS and give it a width of 200 pixels and a height of 250 pixels and see what happens, right? So now we have everything overlapping, which is what's expected, right? So how do I stop my node content from overlapping into the other node and into the other node and into the other node, right? The way we do this is something called overflow. And this is a special property. It lets you pick if we want things to overflow our container. And so we say none, and they will not overflow. Overflow. Let me just show you all the options. So overflow hidden is the default one, so it doesn't show anything. We can have overflow auto, where you can scroll on things. So hidden is this, you know, it just hides it for you, from you. Auto will let you scroll on it if it goes bigger than the size. So now we get a little scroll bar and we can scroll on our node. Pretty cool, huh? And scroll by default will always have a scroll bar, right? No matter what, right? So if we had a really short note, like let's make one, I don't know, in our content, instead of having a bunch of things, it's just going to say the first 3 words, right? So our very first note, it's very short. It doesn't have a lot of information. It's just going to say lorem ipsum, right? So it's only 1 line even. So that one doesn't need a scroll bar. So in our overflow, instead of scroll, if we had auto, that one should not have a scroll bar at all, right? That one shows up normally, and then all the other ones have a scroll bar because they're bigger than what they're supposed to be. But what I like to do is hidden. I want to hide the text that's bigger than the box. And there we have it, you know, it's hiding it. Now it's not giving me a big enough box for some reason. Apparently a height of 250 pixels is not enough. So let's go 350. So that's not working. And care to wonder why it's not working? Why is this height not working? It's being resized by the parent, right? Which is a flex. And so in order for it to be like 100% all the time, don't get resized by anything, height, we go min height. Now it will obey the 350 pixel rule, right? Or 250 in this case, which might be too big. So let's put a border because they have a border anyway. So right now that's too big. I think 250 was too much, 220. There, that looks more like it. 220 is nice. Another thing that we have to wonder is the H4 in here, inside every one of our notes, has a margin on it, right? And we want to remove that margin so that it doesn't take up so much space up there. So we're going to target it in our CSS by doing, so the H4 inside our note, right, margin 0. Now it's not going to have any margins. Cool. So our note's going to go all the way to the top. And then we want to have some padding around our note. Maybe 1 rem padding, right? So cool. Maybe that 1 rem is too much top to bottom, because when I look at it from here, I think that top to bottom is a lot smaller than left and right. So we can specify the padding to be top and bottom 0.5 rem. And then left and right, 1 rem. So left and right will have 1 rem, but top and bottom will have less, right? Ooh, I forgot something about our notes. In between our H4 and our paragraph, we're going to need an HR. That's a little line. It's called a horizontal line. Ooh, why didn't it show up? Oh, never mind. I put it in the wrong one. So let's hard code it in. Okay, and that HR looks like it's having some margin on its own, right? At least on the bottom part. So let's target that HR and say, don't give it a margin bottom. Yeah, it looked like it was having some margin on its own. So let's see. We want the top of the HR to have maybe 0.25 rem. And we want the bottom of it to have 0.25 rem. Oh. Top, right, bottom, left. Maybe nothing on the bottom. I don't know what's causing this spacing. I think the paragraphs have their own spacing. So I need to figure out if the paragraphs have a margin by default. And let's do that right now. Note P. Margin of 0. Oh, look at that. Paragraphs did have an automatic margin. Wow, I didn't like that. So anyway, the HR is going to take care of that for us. Cool. So we have our spacing more or less the way our spacing inside here is. Maybe it's 0.5, 0.25, something like that. Yeah. Okay. And the bottom of our content, so our paragraphs, right, are clipping down here. You see? So we want them to clip one line before. So now we can see, okay, our paragraphs can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines, right? So let's give our paragraphs a height and of 9 letters and a overflow hidden. Well, 9 was too little. About 10 letters. There we go. So did you guys see how I did that? I counted how many lines I wanted each note to have. And in here, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So our notes should be 6 high. So let's give it 7. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Something gets cut off in the bottom there. I guess our spacing is not perfectly right with our font size. Yeah. About 6.5. There we go. Oh, maybe 6.6. So the Q's can show up. And the P's, 6.7. I'm better. I'm happy now. At least the P shows up all the way. And a lot of these is like adding salt and pepper again. So we found that our box is too big, so our notes need to be smaller than 220 pixels. Let's try 200 and see where that takes us. Okay, 200 is too big. Let's try 180. Cut it by 20 every time. 170. Ooh, that seems good. 170 is pretty enough. Cool. So I have my notes more or less like that. 170. I'm happy with 170. I'm sticking with 170. But they're all stacked on top of each other, and they're not spaced evenly, and they're not left and right like this in 3 columns or something like that, right? So how can I achieve this? I look at whatever holds them, and then I'm going to make sure it's a flex. So our notes are inside our notes list container. Let's double check that. They're inside notes list container. And notes list container goes top to bottom, right? So we need a div to hold all the notes together. So I go here, div, div. And this div is going to have a class name. Notes list, right? So it's going to be a flex. I think that's pretty good. Huh, look at that. They're already going left and right. But I don't want them to go that wide. You know, and I definitely want them to stack, right? So I need to give this notes list a minimum or a maximum width of, what was it, 660 pixels initially we thought about. And we want to allow it to wrap so that things do go to the next line if we need to. So now it wraps, and now we have a minimum width of 660 pixels, right? So it's really big, and it's having, you know, 3 rows, which is what the client wanted. They didn't specify anything about mobile view, right? So we can give it a width of 660 pixel and a min width of 300 pixels. So now it will allow for mobile view as well, if I'm correct. Oh, Not really, because the component doesn't get smaller than that. So anyway, like this min width is irrelevant. But we're still not having them separate each other. So each node themselves doesn't have any space in between the other like it does right here, right? So we need to have some margin on each node. So we go margin somewhere up here. And top and bottom, you know, what is top and bottom should be like 1 rem. And left and right, 0.5 rem. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, okay. So if we look at our example down here, we notice that left and right and top and bottom are different. You see, left and right is one width, top and bottom is another width. So that is why I put 2 different numbers on top and bottom and left and right, right? Left and right should be the same distance as this, which I think that's 0.5. No, not there. Whoops. That's the margin. So yeah, that's 1 rem, yep. And then left and right should be, you know, 0.5. So 0.5 over here, 0.5 over here. Now we can increase these a little bit if you want. If you think that you want them to be all even, you can set them up to all even, like 0.5, 0.5. I think I like them all even. What do you guys think? Would you rather have an app where everything looks evenly spaced or no? Even? Okay, I'm with you on that one too. So if we're gonna have an even all the way around, you know, 0.5, right? That works for me. You know, our nodes are evenly spaced, right? Now we definitely want our header to be evenly spaced. You see how our header is not separated enough from the rest of our content on the left over here. So we definitely want that separation to be the same, so that it lies in one whole line. Like, let me annotate so that we can kind of see what I'm talking about. Right? This is line over here. I want it to move to over here. So I'm going to need to fix our headers alignment really quick. And the way I'm going to do that, just clear all drawings real quick. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to look at the header, which is right here. It has a margin of 0. And I'm going to add this margin to it. So top and bottom is 0, but left and right is 0.5 rem. Oh, well, that's not the header I was talking about. Where is that header at? Inside my notes list. Oh, it's inside notes list container. So I need to select it from here. Or just give it a class. Content header. Content header. And this I'm going to put inside my index.css because I want to reuse this one in every single content, right? My margin top and bottom is 0, and left and right is 0. Was it 0.5 rem? There we go. Oh, and top and bottom needs to be more. Let me look at our view here. So it looks like top and bottom needs to be quite a bit more, maybe like 1 rem. According to what that looks like. Yep, that looks more like the actual example. So we have sort of a, let's just put them side to side with each other. We have sort of copied, right, in a way, the style of our application. Now we're missing something. There's a white background on this, okay? And maybe there's more spacing. There's double spacing in between these texts if you look at it. This is single spacing. And they're a little longer tall than wider, right? But I'm not going to be so specific. I'm just going to put the white text in the background and call this a good note. So let's go do that real quick. Back to our notes list, index CSS. In my note, I'm going to give it background color of white. And look at that. We've got our first, I don't know what to call this. We essentially met our first feature. We can show our client, look how cool it looks, right? This is what the application looks like. And so because I made a win, well, guess what? Every win deserves a push, right? First feature achieved. Styled note list, or I'm going to put it in another line. Component. Hard-coded some notes in HTML. CSS finished. Yeah. For feature 1. And I'm going to push. So we've essentially styled and hard-coded our first feature. Now, none of this works. None of these has functionality yet. But for the purpose of showing, right, we have everything set up. However, I want to break something into something even smaller, right? We have these notes being generated by hard coding them, right? So this is a place where we can have a map that will generate these notes for us. But for the purpose of displaying what a map does before we go and have a lunch and then come back in about an hour, right? Because I'm hungry as hell and you guys probably are too. I'm going to put this inside an array. So up here, on top of my render, I'm going to say const notes element equals an array, okay? And that array is going to contain every single one of these notes in it, every single one of these divs inside of it. The only difference is there's going to be a comma at the end of each div. Oops, not two. All right. So I have an array of notes up there. I can hide that array. See that? But it looks exactly like what we had earlier. And I can put that in here, inside JSX, notes, elements. And guess what's going to happen? Ta-da! That is what map is doing for us, is creating an array of elements and then returning it for us so we can display it inside our curly braces. In case you guys ever were mystified about what map is doing, so in here, I'm going to replace that later with map functionality that's going to generate each one of these divs with some information, right? So we still have to refactor, but this gets into a better understanding of what's going on in there. What's actually happening inside my code when I use a map, right? And this is it. Anyway, hope you guys really liked it. I'm going to stop the video and let it compile so that I don't have like a 4-hour video.